Hi everyone, this is Dr. Trinka, and the name of this webinar is Insights into Alzheimer's. First, a little bit about myself. I am a doctor of optometry and also a doctor of nutrition. And I have to figure out how to go ahead and move my slides, which I'm trying to do. Hold on just a second. I mean, I can do this without doing any of the slides in the webinar, but it wouldn't benefit you guys. So let me see what I can do. Hold on just a sec. There we go. I've got it. Okay, so I'm ready. If you guys are, let's go do it. Alzheimer's is, I should talk about myself a little bit first before I jump into Alzheimer's. So I've been a neurooptometrist for 6 years, a certified nutritionist for approximately 20 years, syntonic optometrist for about the same amount of time, 20 years, and I've been practicing optometry. Someday I'll get it right. I've been practicing for 30 years. If you have any idea about what a syntonic optometrist is, then you know that the word syntony means balance. And I think it's appropriate to try to balance the nervous system with color. And that's what a syntonic optometrist does with light therapy. They use different frequencies of light. So that's a little bit about me. That's probably way too much. I don't generally like talking about myself that much, but it's part of what I've got to do tonight. So let's get into it. Alzheimer's, as you know, I looked this up, and there's definitely some confusion about what is the leading cause of death. I mean, we know the leading cause of death in the United States is heart disease and then cancer. And some people think the third cause is medications and what they call iatrogenic, which is doctor errors. But 4 through 6, some people say it's Alzheimer's, some people say it's accidents. So somewhere between 4th and 6th leading cause of death. That should get your attention. About 6 million people in the United States have it. That should get your attention as well. And no one has a handle on this. We're not doing well. And according to what I've read, the numbers will triple by the year 2050. A lot of money is spent yearly on caring for Alzheimer's patients. And you know what? This is not the biggest deal. It's not the money that's spent. It's the heartbreak. It's the caregivers. It's not only the person that has it. It's the caregivers and the sadness that they have to go through in watching, and typically their loved ones, and the sadness that they have to go through in watching that person degenerate over time. And not only that, but it's that person's life and the people that are dependent on them. So there's a giant ripple effect from the people who have Alzheimer's and the people that care for them and the people that care for the caretakers. So this is a big deal, and I think it's worthy talking about. This is a slide I came up with, and it's ridiculously old, right? It's 12 years old. And do you think Alzheimer's has gotten better or worse? Everything I read says it's progressing. It's getting worse. So if you take prostate cancer and breast cancer, then they don't equal the amount of people that have Alzheimer's in the United States. So that just kind of puts it into perspective for me. It's important. I mean, and I think we should talk about it and find out what it takes to have a better approach to it, because I don't think the approach that we have works real well right now. So if you were going to define Alzheimer's, You would say that it is progressive destruction of the brain, and it's got increasing amounts of these substances in the brain called amyloid plaques and tau protein tangles. And we'll get in a little bit to what an amyloid plaque is and a tau protein tangle, but most of the work that I've done here in this webinar is going to concentrate on amyloid plaques. So let's continue. Oh, there was my little picture. There we go. So I pulled a slide and just gives you a feel for neurons being close to each other and connecting with each other. And the spaces in between the neurons are called synapses. And that's generally where the amyloid plaque is going to interfere. So it's going to interfere with the communication between nerves. Tau protein tangles are the destruction of the architecture of the neuron itself. And both are part of what happens in the neurodegeneration called Alzheimer's. So anything that we can do to limit neurofibrillary tangles or tau protein tangles and amyloid plaques is very much worthwhile. It gets a little bit more complicated than that, and that's pretty much the rest of the webinar. So it's interesting. When you talk to people with Alzheimer's, oftentimes they can remember things that are 40 years ago with incredible clarity and detail, but they can't remember what they had for breakfast. And the reason why that is because there's a specific general area in most of Alzheimer's that starts in a part of your brain called the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is where short-term memories are converted to long-term memories. And so if you can't convert a short to a long-term, you almost feel like that guy in 50 First States whose name is Tom, and every 10 seconds he goes, "Hi, my name is Tom," and then he forgets that he introduced himself. And so that part of the brain is a very vulnerable place for amyloid plaques. And so if you can intervene, you can slow this whole thing down and you don't get generalized brain atrophy. Here's a picture of a healthy brain and an Alzheimer's brain. And you can see it just shrank. I mean, they talk about hippocampal volume, they talk about brain volume, and here's a very clear example of what happens to a brain when the neurodegeneration is unchecked and it's over time. So it's really catastrophic, which is what this guy says. This guy, Michael Merzenich, is a pretty brilliant guy. And I think the key point here is that you can do something about it. And that's a kind of what the rest of the webinar is all about as well, is that there's things to do. So let's get into it. Before we get into the therapies, however, I want to talk a little bit about the fact that there's a genetic risk. And there's this gene called ApoE4. And you can potentially get a copy from one parent and a copy from another, or no copies because neither one of your parents have it. Or you can get, the worst case scenario is 2 copies. And so these are genes that you have passed along from your parents. So if a relative or a parent has Alzheimer's, by definition, you are at a higher risk. Even if you don't have any copies of the ApoE4 gene, which is generally a pretty easy test to get, you still stand about a 9 or 10% risk of getting Alzheimer's due to all the factors that I'm going to talk about today. And you can see what this says. If you have 1 copy, you got about a quarter risk and about half risk if you have 2. Here's the news. Even if you have 2 copies of the ApoE4 gene, which means you have a greater than 50% risk for developing Alzheimer's, it doesn't mean that you're going to get it. Because as Merzenich says, it's largely preventable. This is if you do nothing. If you let nature take its course and you don't intervene and you don't do anything, and you live a lifestyle that is typical of many Americans. I'm excited to talk about that part, but I have got to go through some other things first. So, this ApoE4 gene has a lot of impact on neuronal health and on how the nerves talk to each other, which is called synaptic function, or the generation of new nerves, which is called neurogenesis, or the clearance of amyloid beta, which is one of the nasty features that's characteristic of Alzheimer's. It also decreases blood flow and decreases the energy sources in the neurons to produce energy. And that all of that stuff produces bad brain activity, more tangles, more amyloid beta, more toxicity, and more brain atrophy. So this is an important gene. It's good to know, but it's like everything. The genetics that you have are only expressed by the lifestyle you lead. And so you can have some pretty awful genetics. And believe me, I've heard some terrible. I mean, it's part of what I do with every patient every day is, what's going on in your family history. And there's people that follow right along with what's going on in their family. And there's people that overcome what their genetics are because of how they live their life. I think that's a key point. So how do we look at Alzheimer's, and how do we make sure that a person has it? It's not as straightforward as you think, although the symptoms are really big. There are cognitive tests that you can take. You can take one online. I'll mention that in a little bit. There's sort of MRI type ways and spinal tap. Ultimately, no one's going to get diagnosed as Alzheimer's unless it interferes with your activities of daily living. If it's not doing that, there's not going to be a diagnosis. And this is probably a good time to say that Alzheimer's falls under a larger umbrella called dementia. And there's a number of kinds of dementia. There's Parkinson's involved dementia. There's something called Lewy body dementia. There's frontotemporal dementia. There's vascular dementia. There's a lot. But without question, Alzheimer's is the largest form, over 85%. And that's the one that most people have heard of. And that's the one that we're concentrating on today. So let's get kind of into this diagnosis issue and see what's there. So as you all know, there's a progressive loss of short-term memory. And this is the thing that everybody knows. And, it's not like people don't have senior moments. It's when they have a lot of them and they forget something. And memory is a very interesting thing and very, very vulnerable to environmental factors and to stress. It's not that unusual for a person to not remember something in a moment of stress. That's not Alzheimer's, but it for sure is part of this whole thing. I guess the key term here is progressive. It's not better than it was 2 weeks ago. It's worse. It's worse than it was a month ago. So it's progressive. One of the things that I've noticed when I've come into contact and read about Alzheimer's people or patients is disorientation. And what I mean by this is they can go drive to a place that they've driven many, many times, and they'll get lost going home. They can't find their way. They're not oriented towards going back home. So that's disorientation, right? I saw this in a relative and drove to the hospital every day, no problems, and then had problems getting back home. And that was a clear sign that something was really going on. The personality and the mood changes that happen are, to me, that's kind of a duh, because your brain is who you are. I'm Terry because of the way my brain works. And yes, there's a larger part of me outside my brain called my mind or my soul or however you want to put it. However, um, the person that I present to people that allows me to go forward in my daily life and meet the challenges that I have in my life are due to the way my brain works. And so when you have progressive destruction, neurodegeneration of your brain, of course you're going to get personality changes and mood changes. A lot of anger. A lot of anger is involved in this when a person realizes what's going on and they have the feeling that they can't do anything about it. I'd be angry too. One of the most common cognitive tests is called the MoCA, which is Montreal Cognitive Assessment. You can go ahead and put this into your search browser, and you can take the test yourself. So there's 30 possible points that you could get in this, and this is easy. I mean, this is not hard stuff. You look at a bunch of animals and you go, yep, that's a lion, that's an elephant. This is not hard. One of the most characteristic parts of this test that points to a problem is clock drawing. And so in the clock drawing, you have to make your own clock and draw 10 after 11. If you can't do that, that's a signal that you're experiencing a little cognitive decline. And so that can be an issue. So 26 or higher is normal. I would probably say 27 or higher is normal. I mean, I read this in a lot of different publications, but I saw people I've read about people that have had MoCA tests of 19 or 16. That has progressed. And there's a lot of different things in this test. There's a little memory. They'll give you 4 numbers, and then they'll ask you what the numbers were before, about 10 minutes later. There's number counting. There's kind of visual spatial. Where are you? What time is it? That was really basic tests. This is the test that our illustrious president took and said he, quote unquote, aced it. When I'm thinking that you should ace it because it's not hard. But it's a really good test, and it's about 95% accurate in terms of identifying whether or not you should do other tests to figure out that you've got some kind of cognitive decline. So I don't know if you guys know what PET scan is. It stands for positron emission tomography. And essentially what people do is they drink this liquid that's got a substance in it that will show up because it stains amyloid plaques. And when they do a special kind of a scan, kind of like an MRI, it'll light up where you have the amyloid plaques. That's the good news. I mean, it's great to go ahead and say, hey, you've got a bunch of amyloid plaque. You have overproduction of amyloid plaque. The bad part is that insurance doesn't usually cover it. And it's about, I don't know, $4,000 or $5,000. That's out of range for a lot of people. And plus add in the whole denial thing. Like, I don't really have this happening, right? But it can be very useful in the diagnosis of Alzheimer's. So let's take a look at this. So here's an amyloid scan. On the top is a person that doesn't have Alzheimer, and on the bottom is a person that does. I want you to note that there's probably a little bit of amyloid in the negative scan, right? And that's a really key point. The key point is how much. And it's not that you have it or you don't have it. Again, this is one of those subtle pieces for this disease, is that you have to have enough of it to start causing neurodestruction. And so just because you have amyloid plaque does not mean you have Alzheimer's. Just because you have Alzheimer's does not necessarily mean you're going to have massive amounts of amyloid plaque. So this is just another piece that puts it into perspective, that says you have this going on or you don't. Because sometimes symptoms are not, they're not perfect. Some people can kind of, they can rally and they seem okay, and then they're not. And like I said, there are other instances that can affect how a person can remember things. But if you can't remember anything and you can't find your way home and you have amyloid plaque, it's pretty solid. It's a pretty solid diagnosis. So another thing that's cheaper and yet not as used is how much is in your cerebral spinal fluid. And so looking at these biomarkers of amyloid beta and tau protein tangles when you do a spinal tap is yet another, it's another way to look at whether or not you have this process of neurodegeneration happening. So as I said before, it's not always straightforward. The presence of these biomarkers in your cerebral spinal fluid or in a PET scan does not always show Alzheimer's, even if you have it. And even if you don't have it, doesn't mean you don't have it. So it requires looking very carefully. It's not straightforward, which is a little frustrating. But typically, symptoms are really big. Symptoms are big. One of the things that I'm really interested in is this new research that's being done on retinal scanning. Because I'm a neurooptometrist, I'm very interested in how the retina connects to the brain and back and forth. And there's a Dr. Black out on the West Coast that is developing this brain scan that you can use in the retina, and it detects very small plaques. And the idea would be is to make the diagnosis if you think it's there, take this retinal scan, engage in some kind of therapy that would help Alzheimer's, which is basically what the rest of the webinar is about, and see if the amounts and the frequencies and the locations change. Clinical trials are going on right now, and my hope is that in the next year or two, we're going to see this as a standard way to deal with this in terms of diagnosis, and also to see if therapies are effective. So here's the elephant in the room. If you know anything about what it takes to bring a drug to market, it takes millions of dollars just to get it to go from inception to market. This has been done over and over and over. And billions of dollars have been spent in research to find a drug that can cure Alzheimer's. But nothing has really come of it. And, maybe there's a little help, but people don't get cured by medications for Alzheimer's. And most of the medications for Alzheimer's are trying to improve the neurotransmitters in between the neurons that are been messed up by the amyloid plaque. So why is this? So the biggest reason is that there's too many factors. I read a book. Actually, I was taking an infrared sauna that I bought. I believe in detoxification because I believe that we live in a toxic world, and there's many ways to get rid of toxins in your body. Sweating is one of them. And so I was reading Dr. Dale Bredesen's article in the magazine called Nature. And in that book, or in that article, before he wrote the book, he outlined 10 people that he helped that couldn't find their way home. They had disorientation. They had short-term memory loss. And he went ahead, did all the research on why he thought they had it, applied the therapies for that. 9 of them went back to work. That is stunning. I mean, that is like, wow. And so I was so excited when I read that I decided I was going to get his book, The End of Alzheimer's. And in it, he outlines he says there's 36 known factors molecularly that promote your brain to produce the amyloid plaques. And what he likens it to is 36 holes in your roof. And so if you have 36 holes in your roof and it's raining, a drug is only going to patch up 1 or 2 holes. That's not going to cut it. You're going to get pretty wet. And so, but not all 36 do you have to address to stem the tide, to turn your brain into neurodegeneration, from neurodegeneration to neuronal health or neurogenesis or making new connections, which is called neuroplasticity. So I thought this was a really appropriate analogy. And this is my belief that there's not going to be a drug that cures Alzheimer's. So if you're waiting for them, I think you're going to wait for a long time. It's basically find out what these 36 factors are that promote the overproduction of amyloid plaques. So in this book that Dr. Bredesen goes into, he says, hey, all Alzheimer's is not the same. There's different kinds, and they all have different properties, and they affect, mainly the same parts of the brain, except for the toxic one, which affects the whole brain. And so let's talk a little bit about these 4 types of Alzheimer's and how you can determine which one is appropriate to investigate for either you or your loved one or whatever. So the first type, inflammatory, so the key point is find out what type you have, right? So let's go back a little bit. Let's talk about the inflammatory one. So, inflammation is a good thing and a bad thing, right? If you have a destructive microorganism like a virus or a bacteria or a parasite, and your body gets inflamed to try to deal with the toxic effects of that microbe, that's a good thing. If you cut yourself open and let's say you cut your finger and your finger becomes inflamed, that's a good thing. That's part of the healing process. However, inflammation on a low level, constant effect is really damaging to tissues. And we're talking about the brain here. And so low level inflammation is a really bad thing potentially is a very bad thing for your brain. There are some lab tests that we're going to get into in just a sec that will identify that one. Atrophic is basically the receptors in your brain need to attach to different vitamins and minerals and hormones so that they promote neuronal health, so they promote brain health. If you don't have those things, they're going to lean towards neurodestruction by the overproduction of amyloid beta. And so this pretty much begs the question, do you have enough nutrients? Do you have enough hormones? Glycotoxic is to me, this is one I really knew about. So glyco stands for glucose. And how many people in the United States do you think have diabetes or pre-diabetes? I was on a webinar with another brilliant doctor by the name of David Perlmutter, and he wrote a book called Grain Brain. And in it, he basically says Alzheimer's is diabetes type 3. If Alzheimer's is diabetes type 3, what are you doing to check your risk for diabetes? So back to my question, how many people in America do you think have diabetes or pre-diabetes? Pre-diabetes is called insulin resistant. And we can get into the mechanism for why they call that in insulin resistant, but basically it's a precursor to diabetes. Well, there's about 40 or so million people with diabetes in America. there's an additional 85 million people that have pre-diabetes. That's 1 in 3 people in America. This is, I mean, I look at this and I was like, man, this is a ticking time bomb. So glycotoxic is a type of Alzheimer's that's due to blood sugar alterations. That's as simple as I can put it. And then the toxic form is one of the reasons why I take a infrared sauna once or twice a week. I want to get rid of toxins. We live in an immensely toxic world, through our foods, through our, our body care products, through our cleaning products, through our air, through our water. This is big. And this is absolutely the hardest form of Alzheimer's to deal with, because you have to find the toxin and remove it. And then you have to restore all of the things that make neuronal health. So this is the hardest one. So as you saw before, you got to find out which type you have. And the only way to find out which type you have is you got to take a look you have to do kind of like an internal terrain assessment of your body. And so that means labs. And that also means looking at your lifestyle with a hard look. And this is really difficult to say, but there are some people that are in love with the way that they live so much that they're willing to accept brain degeneration. They are addicted to sweets. They will not give that up. They will not exercise. They live on stress. They don't care about sleep. I mean, these are all the lifestyle things, right? So let's talk a little bit more about this. So lab tests, as I said before, you have to find out what your blood sugar status. So how do you do that? Well, so I'm going to make a comment here before I jump into this, and that is, if you go to your traditional medical doctor that's covered by your insurance, they're not going to do these tests. Only on a super basic level. And that's not because they don't care about you. They care deeply about you. What they can't do is they can't move outside the insurance paradigm. And so the insurance company is calling shots and saying, no, we're not going to do fasting insulin. No, we're only going to do A1C and blood sugar. And you can get a pretty good idea, but in many of these cases, you can't get the lab tests you need from your standard medical doctor, because their hands are tied by the insurance companies who are calling the shots for what the medical doctors can do. So sometimes you have to step out of the system and think for yourself. Go find somebody that will do these tests. So when it comes to blood sugar tests, I already alluded to this, a blood sugar status. So what makes more sense, eating food and getting a blood sugar test, or fasting? Fasting, because all people who look at blood sugar status will compare it to the standard of a 12-hour fast. So you do a 12-hour fast and you say, okay, how much sugar's in my blood? And how much sugar's in your blood should be between about 75 and 90, maybe 80 and 95, somewhere in there. If you're in the hundreds, you need to pay attention. There's another test, and it's called hemoglobin A1C. Hemoglobin is part of your red blood cells, and glucose attaches to your red blood cells. And that is a 3-month window. Typically, the number needs to be below 5.6. Excuse me. Sorry about that. So you need, and then fasting insulin. If your insulin is below 5, you're probably doing pretty good. If your fasting blood sugar is between, say, 80 and 95, you're probably doing pretty good. And if your A1C is below 5.6, you're probably doing pretty good. So that takes care of that glycotoxic one. That's probably not in play if you're not insulin resistant or pre-diabetic or diabetic. So the brain needs some things to function well. It needs movement, it needs glucose, and it needs oxygen. If you're anemic, you can't carry oxygen to your brain, and your brain's going to degenerate. And so This is part of typically, this part is usually part of almost every blood test that's done by every medical doctor in the insurance world. And so this one's pretty easy to get. So typically they're going to look at something called the complete blood count and look at, they're going to look at your hemoglobin and your hematocrit. And these are just markers that say, yeah, you probably have no anemia, or we should further investigate. What most traditional frontline docs are not going to do is they're not going to test for vitamin and mineral deficiencies. What we've learned is that you can't check the blood for what they call serum for vitamin and mineral deficiencies. They're not accurate enough. You actually have to do something called red blood cell or white blood cell analysis. This is where you find, now the exception is probably vitamin D. And vitamin D is crucial to brain health. And the way the labs run is if you're above 36, you're fine. And Dr. Bredesen makes a great point in his book, The End of Alzheimer's. And he says, you don't want to be in the range. You want to be in the optimal range. And the optimal range for vitamin D is somewhere between 60 and 80. 60 is a great number to shoot for. So if you're at 40, nobody in the insurance paradigm is going to pay attention to you. But that's not good enough. You need to be at about 60. The same thing is true with hormone status. You have to have enough hormones to make your brain work well. Now, it's true as people age, their hormone levels go down, but they don't go down to nothing. So you need some. And there's many pathways that we can talk about that show that hormones have huge effects on brain function. And so, you know what the hormones I'm talking about, the sex hormones like estrogen and progesterone and testosterone, those are important, but all the thyroid hormones, the impacts the thyroid hormones have on brain health is phenomenal. So you can't be hypothyroid. The adrenal glands, which are these little glands that sit on top of your kidneys that modulate stress and blood sugar, there's a bunch of hormones that come out of that gland, which are like cortisol and pregnenolone and DHEA. They have to be in a decent status so that your brain can maintain its ability to fire. And then if all of that stuff's right and optimal, and a person is still undergoing neurodegeneration, then it's likely toxins. And what are toxins? Well, heavy metals. To this day, dentists are still putting mercury in people's mouths. Not so much as when I was growing up, but it still happens. To me, that's crazy. There are, if you ever saw the movie called The Graduate, there's a guy in there that says the next big thing is plastics. And it is the next big thing, and it's turned out to be a major problem. Plastics can very much hurt you. There's an element in plastic called bisphenol A and B that are toxic, and plastics are everywhere. My recommendation would just generally be limit plastic in your life. That's not that easy to do, but it's well worth it. What about pesticides and herbicides and fungicides, mold toxins? Mold is a very underappreciated source of toxins in the United States. And you don't have to be living in Louisiana to become exposed to mold. I've seen plenty of people here in Colorado that have problems with mold. So there's all kinds of elegant tests to find the toxin. So lab tests are critical, but so are lifestyle factors. So let's talk a little bit about the lifestyle factors. These are the ones that I think are the biggest. Let's talk a little bit about it. Let's talk about sleep. So I think consistent routine is probably the big deal. If you ever want to know a ton about sleep, there's a book by Matt Walker, who's another neuro researcher. And the book is called Why We Sleep. And it's phenomenal. I I read it to go fall asleep for probably 3 months. I'd read a couple pages and I'd be like, "Oh, this is really intense. I'm out of here." But I got through the book. It's a nice read, and it helped me sleep. So I was happy about that. But in it, he says a lot of things that are, I'm saying here, you have to let your body know that it's morning and know that it's evening. There's all kinds of things that we do to mess up that rhythm. Like we have lots of bright lights on at night. We look at blue screens that interfere with our melatonin. So our brain really doesn't know. One of the most important things about sleep is you clean your brain when you sleep. If you don't sleep very much, you're not cleaning your brain. All of the toxic debris that accumulates from all the hours that you're up generally tends to get washed away through a system called the glymphatic system, which is very active when you sleep. I mean, that's the most basic I can put it. And there's this thing called sleep hygiene, and it's not like having anything to do with soap, but it just says there's a routine that you should have, and your room should be dark and it should be colder, and you should take a lot of electromagnetic devices out of it, and you should have the comfortable bed. And these are all things that relate to sleep hygiene and consistent routine. So an enormous thing. This right there. Dale Bredesen also has a point, and one of his points is he calls it the 12-3. And he said, so when you eat dinner at night, don't eat for 3 hours. This is key. This is really important. Don't eat for 3 hours. Go to sleep. Don't eat again for 12 hours from the time that you've ate dinner. So if you go to bed at 10, you ate dinner at 7, do not eat breakfast before 7. Actually, and he would probably agree, intermittent fasting is another way to help this whole glymphatic system and the housekeeping and the maintenance of the debris removal in your brain. So it's that consistent fasting for 12 hours that makes a big difference in the way your brain works. So we could spend 3 hours on this slide alone, but I won't. There's just a lot to know about the food that you put in your mouth. It's critical. It's fundamental. This is sleep and diet are enormous. You have to be able to learn to read labels. You have to. You can't eat too much or too little. You can't have too low a blood sugar. That hurts brain function. You can't have too much blood sugar. That hurts brain function. Certain foods cause blood sugar to go up, right? One of the biggest, I mean, it was funny when I learned this 20 years ago, one of the biggest foods and their effects on blood sugar is watermelon. It'll make your blood sugar skyrocket. I thought, well, it's worse than sugar. I thought that was really interesting. So it behooves you to learn about what foods generally cause your blood sugar to rise quickly. This is called the glycemic index, or the glycemic load, another way to look at it. And generally, the ones that do the least of this are above ground vegetables. So get used to eating above ground vegetables and protein of your favorite source. I like fish, fowl, and animals. I mean, that's what I eat. It's great, but I have high quality of all these things. It's not enough to eat meat or fish or fowl. You have to eat quality, which means the confined animal feedlot operation industry should go away, because they have meats that are full of hormones and antibiotics. Do you really want to be putting that in your body? So the effect of food on blood sugar is huge. And then the food sensitivity. So the common ones are gluten, dairy, soy, and corn. And this is like the base of the pyramid. Whenever I have somebody that I'm working with that I'm trying to figure out if they've got a food problem, I almost always try to eliminate these 4 things: gluten, dairy, soy, and corn, because they're the biggest offenders in producing inflammation in your body. Remember the type of Alzheimer's that says inflammatory? Well, here's definitely one of the reasons, is that the foods that you eat can cause inflammation in your body. So how do you figure it out? Well, lab tests can help. Rotation and elimination is great. So you knock it out for 2-3 weeks, maybe a month, and then you put it in for 3 days and see how you feel. This is a pretty accurate way. It's free, but it's hard. I mean, you have to really have a lot of willpower. And then see how it goes. And you have to eat it for 3 days because food sensitivity can be delayed. You can eat something on Monday and react on Wednesday. And then the timing of food. And this gets back to Dr. Bredeson's 12-3. Most of the things that I read and the authors that I look at say that there's a zone of staying away from food that'll really help brain health. And it's mild intermittent fasting. And so if you stop dinner at 6 or 7 o'clock at night, how long can you go before you start to eat again? 16 hours, 18 hours? Can you time your eating to 6-7 hours of the day? If you have really low blood sugar, this is probably a bad idea. And so that's why it leads to blood tests. You should get a blood test and find out, are you low or high in blood sugar? What I've learned over 20 years is that a lot of physiology is like Goldilocks. Not too much, not too little, somewhere in the middle. And it's true about blood sugar, somewhere in the middle. So how many hours can you not eat in a day in, day out basis before you don't feel as good? And it's individual. It's not, you can't make generalizations. For some people, it's 12 hours and that's it. For other people, it's 16, 17 hours. But somewhere in that time frame is going to be right for you. And guess what it promotes? It promotes something called autophagy. When you look at it, it looks like autophagy, Phagy, autophagy. But it's called autophagy. And autophagy is getting rid of debris in your brain. It's house cleaning. It's getting rid of the metabolic junk that occurs in your brain from all the things you did during the day. So I just compressed 3 hours into about 10 minutes on diet. You need exercise. You need mental exercises. You need aerobic exercises. My sister always used to tell me, sitting is the new smoking. And in some ways, she's really right. And you have to move. And so the minimum, I think, is 30 minutes, 5 days a week. Is that difficult? Well, for some people it is because they have joint pain or they have something else. So find an exercise that works for you. Walking is free. It's usually pretty good. Sometimes walking in a swimming pool is better because people have joint and hip pain or knee pain. Exercise your brain. Play an instrument, play chess. There's some online games like Lumosity. They're great. These are important. It's a move it or lose it type of thing. And then stress. I don't know anybody that's not stressed at some point in their life. Generally, some people lean towards one end of the spectrum or the other. But if your life is stressful, you've heard the saying, stress kills, and stress produces an overproduction of cortisol, which causes neurodegeneration. It hurts your brain. And so, look at all these factors, all the things that people worry about. And there's plenty to worry about, but put it in its own place. There's a certain time you can worry about things in a day, but not 24/7. And if you can't shut it off, that's a whole nother problem. That means that there's already something going on in your neurotransmitters in your brain, or there's hormone issues. And so you can always go to my website, iBrain Connection or 7 Steps to Health, and sign up for a free consult. And I'm happy to talk to you about how do you relieve and how do you deal with stress on a biochemical basis and on a practical basis. So what can you do? I think that probably the go-to for most people who deal with stress management is meditation. And you don't have to spend a lot of time here. And it's really pretty simple. You close your eyes, you try not to think of anything of your breath, and you do that for about 10 minutes. That is the basics. If you do that, your life will change. If you don't do that, try it. I don't know if you ever heard about grounding. The earth provides electrons. Our body needs electrons. By taking off your shoes and socks and putting your feet in the dirt, you get energy from the earth that's electrical. It gives you electrons. It is very relaxing, and it helps your, not only does it help your brain, it helps your whole body. There's many studies that says a walk in the forest reduces cortisol, which is a marker for stress. It's an adrenal hormone. And what are your favorite activities? What do you like to do? Do those at least sometimes, because it'll reduce your stress. Stress causes neurodegeneration. So that's pretty much my webinar. And I think the good news, the message of hope is it's preventable, but you have to do the work. It's one thing to get the lab tests and to look at the lifestyle factors. It is completely another thing to go ahead and act on them, to execute them, to say, oh, I've got inflammatory markers. Where's it coming from? I got to go find that out. Is it my lifestyle? Is it my digestion? Is it the foods that I eat? Is it the toxins that I have? Address those factors. And I can't tell you how important it is to say this. Alzheimer's changes in your brain happen 20 to 30 years before you show symptoms. Let me say that again. 20 to 30 years before you start having senior moments or loss of memory or disorientation, you have changes going on in your brain due to these reasons that Dr. Bredesen laid out in his book. So take action early. You don't want to wait. You're like, well, I'll wait till I have some problems and then I'll do it. You know, prevention doesn't sell in this country, but this is one of the cases that it should. I think it's super important to find out what's going on inside your body and do something about it before it's late. Because Alzheimer's has different stages. 1 through 7 is one, model. If you're at 6 or 7, you're not going to get this done. But if you're at 1 through 5, mild cognitive impairment, you can do a lot. As Dr. Bredesen showed by taking these 10 patients, one of them dropped out, 9 of them went back to work. That is amazing. And so the final thing I'd say to you is act sooner than later. It's never too late. I would make that sort of in air quotes, because in some cases, if it's completely progressed, it is too late. And that I do free 30-minute consultations, either at Integrative Brain Centers with Dr. Stedman and Dr. Maynard, or at my own office, iBrain Connection or 7 Steps to Health. So here's the resources that you have for this webinar, and I appreciate you all being on with me today. Thank you very much.